The bank app refreshed and the number on the screen dropped so low my stomach flipped like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I refreshed it again. Same number. I whispered, "That's not possible," even though my hands were already shaking because some part of me knew exactly what this meant. The savings account we'd been building for years, rent, emergencies, my future, was almost empty. Not low, not miscalculated, drained. I walked into the living room holding my phone like it might explode. My stepfather was on the couch, feet kicked up, watching television like the world wasn't collapsing. My mother stood in the kitchen stirring a pot slowly, deliberately, as if moving any faster might invite trouble. I asked the question anyway, my voice thin but steady. "Why is the account empty?" He didn't even look surprised. That was the first crack. He sighed like I was inconveniencing him and said something about moving money around, about things being handled. I turned to my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything, to demand answers, to protect me the way mothers are supposed to. She didn't. She kept stirring the pot. That silence landed harder than any confession could have. My chest burned as I stood there realizing I was alone in a room full of people who should have had my back. I'd been working double shifts, handing over part of every paycheck, believing we were building stability together, believing family meant safety. In that moment, I felt something break that I didn't know could break. Later that night, I logged into every account I could access. The rent payment hadn't gone through, the car loan was overdue, notices stacked up digitally like dominoes waiting to fall. When I confronted my stepfather again, the truth slipped out in fragments. Money sent elsewhere, expenses that weren't our expenses, another life I wasn't supposed to know about, another woman, another household. I went to my mother's room and closed the door behind me. I told her everything I'd learned. I begged her to say something, to do something. She sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the floor, and said, "I don't want to make things worse." Worse? I realized then that protecting her peace meant sacrificing mine. Within weeks, the house felt hostile. Conversations stopped. Tension thickened the air. When the eviction notice came, no one fought it. When the car was nearly repossessed, no one intervened. I packed my things quietly, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. The first night I slept in my car, I cried so hard my ribs hurt. I parked behind a grocery store, curled up in the back seat, and wondered how silence could push someone out of their own life so completely. I avoided mirrors, avoided phone calls. Shame wrapped around me tighter than the cold. But even in that darkness, something stubborn stayed alive inside me, a voice that whispered, this wasn't the end, that I could survive this, that one day I would understand how I got here and how to make sure it never happened again. I just didn't know yet how much that lesson would cost me. Morning came without permission. The sun rose like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't cracked open the night before. My neck ached from sleeping curled in the back seat, and my mouth tasted like metal and tears. I sat up slowly, checking the windows first, heart pounding, half expecting someone to knock and ask why I was there. No one did. Cars came and went, people loaded groceries, life moved forward while mine stayed stuck in that parking lot. I drove to a gas station across town and locked myself in the bathroom, scrubbing my face with cold water until my eyes looked almost normal. I brushed my teeth with a travel toothbrush I'd kept in my purse since a road trip months ago, never imagining it would become part of my daily routine. I practiced smiling in the mirror. It didn't look real, but it looked passable. Passable had become my goal. I still went to work. I had to. Bills don't pause for heartbreak. I clocked in, answered emails, laughed at the right moments, nodded when people spoke. No one knew I'd slept in my car. No one knew my family had collapsed under the weight of secrets and silence. Carrying that truth felt heavier than carrying everything I owned in the trunk. At lunch, my mother texted me, just one message, "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a long time. I wanted to scream, wanted to ask why she hadn't asked that question weeks ago, before the account was drained, before the eviction notice, before I was homeless. Instead, I typed back, "I'm fine." The lie tasted bitter, but it kept the conversation short. Silence had taught me how to disappear politely. That evening, I parked somewhere new, safer, brighter. I learned quickly which places felt okay and which ones didn't. I learned how to sleep lightly, keys tucked between my fingers, phone always charged. I learned how loneliness sounds different at night, how it echoes in your chest when you finally stop moving. Memories started replaying without warning. Every time I handed over my paycheck, every conversation where my stepfather talked about our future, every moment my mother nodded along. I wondered how long she'd known, if she'd suspected, if she'd chosen not to look too closely because denial was easier than disruption. That question hurt more than the theft itself. On the fourth night, I broke down in my car so violently I scared myself. I cried until my throat burned, until my hands cramped, until I felt hollow. I thought about calling a friend, anyone, but the shame stopped me. I didn't want pity. I didn't want questions I couldn't answer without unraveling. So I sat there alone, learning the dangerous lesson of how easy it is to isolate yourself when you're hurting. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. Numbers blurred. Words slipped past me. When my supervisor asked if I was okay, I almost told the truth. Almost. But my mother's silence echoed in my head, teaching me that vulnerability doesn't always lead to protection. I smiled and said I was just tired. That night, I did something different. I searched online for free counseling services. I didn't know what I was looking for, just something that didn't require money I didn't have. I found a community clinic offering sliding scale therapy. I filled out the intake form sitting in my car, hands shaking as I typed the truth into little boxes that didn't feel big enough to hold it. Family betrayal, financial loss, housing instability. When I hit submit, I felt exposed and strangely relieved, like I'd finally told someone the whole story, even if it was just a screen. As I lay back and stared at the ceiling of my car, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. No one was coming to save me. Not my mother, not family, not comfort wrapped in excuses. If I wanted protection, stability, a future, I would have to build it myself. I didn't know yet that this decision, made alone in the dark, would change the direction of my entire life. The clinic emailed me back 2 days later. 2 days of sleeping in my car. 2 days of pretending at work. 2 days of swallowing questions that had no place to land. The message was short, polite, almost gentle. An intake appointment had opened up. Wednesday evening, sliding scale, confidential. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Help was real, not perfect, not instant, but real. Wednesday came faster than I expected. I parked outside the clinic 15 minutes early and sat there gripping the steering wheel, my heart thudding like I was about to confess a crime. I almost drove away, almost told myself I was being dramatic, that other people had it worse, that I should just toughen up and move on. That voice sounded a lot like my mother's silence, quiet, dismissive, dangerous. Inside, the waiting room smelled like old carpet and herbal tea. The chairs didn't match. The walls were covered in flyers about boundaries, grief, domestic stress, words I'd never been taught to use. I filled out one last form, my handwriting shaky, and then a woman called my name. She didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed. She asked how I was, and when I said fine out of habit, she waited, didn't move on, didn't accept it. The silence stretched, and something in me cracked open. I told her about the money, about my stepfather's second life, about watching my mother choose quiet over truth, about sleeping in my car and brushing my teeth at gas stations like it was normal. I talked fast at first, like if I stopped, the courage would disappear. Tears came later, slow, heavy, embarrassing. She handed me tissues and said something I hadn't heard yet. Silence can be a form of harm. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. I'd been twisting myself into knots trying to understand why my mother's inaction hurt more than the theft itself. Hearing it named, validated, shifted something in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't weak. I'd been wounded twice, once by betrayal, once by abandonment. We talked about boundaries. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Boundaries with family, boundaries with money, boundaries with myself. She explained how growing up without them teaches you to overgive, to confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice, to believe protection is something you earn by staying quiet. I left the clinic exhausted but lighter, like I'd set down a weight I didn't realize I was carrying. Sitting back in my car, I wrote down one sentence she'd asked me to repeat whenever guilt crept in. I am allowed to protect myself, even from family. Work became harder and easier at the same time. Harder because I was finally paying attention to how tired I was. Easier because I stopped blaming myself for it. I started eating better when I could, parking smarter, saving small amounts instead of spiraling about everything I didn't have. My mother called again. This time I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear excuses wrapped in concern. Therapy had taught me that readiness matters, that forcing conversations too early just reopens wounds. Silence didn't mean acceptance anymore. It meant choice. One night after my session, I drove to a quiet overlook and sat watching the city lights flicker. I thought about how easily my life had unraveled when I trusted people who never planned to protect me, and how slowly, deliberately I was stitching myself back together with truth, education, and boundaries. I started researching night classes, financial literacy, credit repair, anything that would give me language and leverage instead of hope and promises. Knowledge felt like armor. Every new term I learned, interest rates, credit utilization, emergency funds, made me feel a little less afraid. But just as I began to believe I was finding my footing, my phone buzzed with a message that tightened my chest instantly. It was from my mother. It said, "I think we need to talk. Things are getting serious." I stared at the screen, knowing whatever she wanted to say could either start healing or reopen everything I was just learning how to survive, and I had no idea yet which one it would be. I didn't respond to my mother right away. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then turned the phone face down, like it could breathe on me if I let it. Things are getting serious. The words felt slippery, vague in the way people get when they're trying to manage outcomes instead of truth. Serious for who? For her marriage? For her comfort? Or for the daughter sleeping in a car because no one chose her? I took a long breath and reminded myself of what therapy had taught me. I didn't owe anyone immediate access to me just because they were family. Readiness mattered. Safety mattered. Still, avoidance has a way of creeping into boundaries if you're not careful, and I didn't want fear to be the thing making my decisions. So I replied, one sentence, "We can talk tomorrow." We met at a diner near the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes burnt no matter how much cream you add. Neutral ground. That was intentional. I arrived early, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't want, heart thudding harder with every passing minute. When she walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered, tired, careful, like someone bracing for impact. She started talking before she even sat down, about stress, about finances, about how my stepfather was going through something. I listened quietly, noticing how she never once said the word stole, never named what he'd done. When I finally interrupted, my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. "I don't need explanations," I said. "I need accountability." She flinched like I'd slapped her. She told me she was trying to keep the family together, that confronting him would have made things worse, that she didn't want to lose everything. I looked at her and felt something shift, not anger, not hatred, but a clear, sharp understanding. She had made a choice, not in a dramatic moment, but slowly, repeatedly, through inaction, and that choice had cost me my home. "I lost everything anyway," I said quietly. "I just lost it alone." Her eyes filled with tears then. She reached across the table, and I pulled my hand back gently but firmly. That boundary felt new and terrifying and right all at once. She asked where I was staying. I told her I was managing. I didn't lie, but I didn't offer details either. My survival didn't need to be a bargaining chip. The conversation ended without resolution. No apology, no plan, just a heavy silence and a check left on the table like an unfinished sentence. As I walked back to my car, I realized something painful and freeing. Closure doesn't always come from other people. Sometimes it comes from accepting who they are willing to be. That night, I cried, not because the conversation went badly, but because it confirmed what I'd been avoiding. My mother loved me, but not enough to disrupt her own life for my safety. Naming that truth hurt, but it also clarified everything. I stopped waiting for her to become someone else. I doubled down on my plan. Night classes started the following month. I enrolled in a credit repair workshop and opened a secured credit card with money I scraped together, slowly, deliberately. I tracked every dollar, learned where my money went, learned where my power had leaked out in the past. Therapy continued to peel back layers I didn't know were there. We talked about generational patterns, how women are taught to endure instead of confront, to keep peace at their own expense, to mistake silence for strength. I saw my mother differently then, not as a villain, but as a woman who had never been taught another way. Understanding didn't excuse her choices, but it released me from carrying them. Weeks passed, then months. I found a room to rent from a woman who didn't ask too many questions, but respected my privacy. I slept in a real bed again. I hung my clothes in a closet. Small victories felt enormous. Each one whispered, "You're rebuilding." One evening, after class, I checked my phone and saw a missed call from my stepfather. No voicemail, just the name lighting up the screen like a test I hadn't studied for. My chest tightened, old instincts urging me to freeze, to defer, to let someone else handle it. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down a new rule for my life. Access is earned, not assumed. I didn't know it yet, but that decision, quiet, unremarkable on the outside, was the moment I stopped being the person this family could sacrifice. And the fallout from that choice was coming faster than I expected. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. Quiet, inconvenient, designed to make me doubt myself. First, my stepfather left a voicemail. His voice was calm, almost kind, like he was calling to check on the weather. He said he didn't understand why I was being so distant. He said families handle things internally. He said mistakes happen. He never said sorry. He never said my money was gone because of him. I deleted the message without replying, my hands shaking even as I did it. Then my mother sent another text, longer this time, careful. She said my stepfather was hurting. She said the stress was affecting his health. She said she wished I would come home so we could talk as a family. I read it twice and felt that familiar pull, the old training to smooth things over, to return to fix what I hadn't broken. Therapy had given me language for that feeling. It was called responsibility displacement, and I was done carrying it. I wrote back slowly. I'm not coming back. I need space. Please respect that. 3 sentences, clear, kind, final. The response came faster than I expected. She accused me of being cold, of abandoning them, of making everything worse by refusing to move on. I stared at the screen, realizing how quickly silence turns into blame when you stop playing your assigned role. The daughter who contributes, the daughter who doesn't ask questions, the daughter who absorbs loss quietly so others can stay comfortable. That night, I barely slept. Even in my rented room, even in a real bed, my body stayed alert like danger might still walk through the door. Trauma doesn't leave just because circumstances change. It lingers in your muscles, your breath, your thoughts at 3 a.m. I reminded myself of where I was. Safe, locked door, my own space. Still, my chest felt tight with grief, not for the family I had, but for the one I'd believed in. At work, I started noticing things I hadn't before, how often I apologized for taking up space, how quickly I volunteered for extra work even when I was exhausted, how deeply the need to prove my worth was wired into me. Therapy helped me connect the dots. When silence is modeled as love, you learn to earn safety by being useful. Classes became my anchor. Night after night, I sat in classrooms with people who didn't know my story and didn't need to. I learned about budgeting, credit cycles, predatory financial dynamics. I learned how often family-based financial abuse goes unnamed because it hides behind loyalty and obligation. Every lesson felt personal. Every spreadsheet felt like reclaiming ground that had been taken from me. One evening, after class, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She asked if the rumors were true, if I'd really turned my back on my mother. I asked her what she'd heard. She hesitated, then said my stepfather claimed I'd overreacted, that I'd misunderstood, that I'd chosen to leave instead of work things out. I felt something cold and steady settle into my chest. This wasn't just denial, it was narrative control. I told her the truth, not angrily, not defensively, just plainly. The drained account, the unpaid rent, the silence, the nights in my car, the therapy, the boundaries. When I finished, she didn't reply right away. Then she said quietly, I didn't know. I told her most people didn't. That's how it works when silence is enforced. A week later, I found out my stepfather had told people I was unstable, that I was struggling mentally, that I needed help. The irony almost took my breath away. I was in therapy, yes, but not because I was broken, because I was healing, because I refused to pretend anymore. The lies stung, but they didn't stop me. If anything, they clarified what I was up against. People who rely on silence panic when it's gone. They replace it with stories that protect themselves. I couldn't control that. I could only control how much access they had to me. I changed my number. The quiet that followed was heavy but clean. No new messages, no accusations, no emotional ambushes, just space. And in that space, I started to feel something unfamiliar grow. Confidence. Not loud, not flashy, just the steady knowledge that I could survive discomfort without surrendering myself, that I could choose truth even when it cost me relationships, that I could be alone without being lost. I didn't know yet that my mother wasn't done trying, because just as I started to feel grounded, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, handwritten, unmistakably hers. And the moment I saw it, I knew whatever was inside would force me to decide one last time who I was willing to be. I didn't open the envelope right away. I held it in my hands like it might vibrate, like whatever was inside could still reach out and pull me back into a version of myself I'd worked hard to outgrow. My mother's handwriting was neat, familiar, careful, the kind of handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards. Seeing it made my throat tighten in a way I hadn't expected. I set the envelope on the table and went about my evening like it wasn't there. I cooked dinner, I reviewed notes from class, I took a shower and let the hot water run longer than usual, grounding myself in the simple fact that this was my space and no one could enter it without my permission. Only when I felt steady enough did I sit down and open the letter. It was longer than I expected. Pages, actually. She wrote about love first, about how she'd carried me for 9 months, how she worried about me every day. She wrote about fear, how scared she was of losing her marriage, of ending up alone, of not knowing how to survive financially if everything fell apart. Then she wrote about silence. She called it keeping the peace. She said she thought things would fix themselves if she just waited long enough. She never wrote the words I needed most. I'm sorry. Not once. The closest she came was, I wish things had gone differently, as if this had been weather, as if it hadn't been a series of choices made while I was handing over my paychecks and trusting the adults in my life to protect me. My chest ached as I read, not because I was surprised, but because hope had still been hiding somewhere in me, waiting to be disappointed. At the end of the letter, she asked to meet again, said she missed me, said she didn't recognize who I'd become. That line stung more than I wanted to admit. I folded the pages carefully and set them aside, my hands calm even though my heart wasn't. I took the letter to my therapy session the next day. I read parts of it out loud, my voice steady until it wasn't. My therapist didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question that cut straight through the noise. What do you need from her to feel safe? I thought about it for a long time. An apology, accountability, acknowledgement of harm, protection. I thought about how none of those things were present in the letter. What she was offering wasn't repair, it was access on her terms. I don't think she can give me what I need, I said quietly. Saying it out loud felt like closing a door I'd been standing in for years. Painful, yes, but also relieving. Clarity has a way of calming chaos. That night, I wrote my response. 1 page, no accusations, no defending myself, just truth. I told her I loved her. I told her I was building a life that required honesty, safety, and accountability. I told her I wasn't willing to meet until those things were possible. I told her silence had harmed me, and I wasn't willing to participate in it anymore. I mailed the letter the next morning and felt a strange mix of grief and pride as I dropped it into the box. I wasn't cutting her off in anger. I was stepping back in self-respect. Weeks passed without a reply. Life continued to grow in small, quiet ways. My credit score inched upward. I saved enough for a real emergency fund, nothing impressive, just enough to remind myself that I could catch my own fall. I stopped flinching every time my phone buzzed. Then, one afternoon, I got a notification from my bank. A deposit. Small. Unexpected. The note attached read, repayment. My hands went cold. It was from my stepfather. No message, no explanation, just money, as if repayment could erase betrayal, as if a transaction could undo abandonment. I sat there staring at the screen, realizing this was his way of trying to buy closure without accountability. I didn't send the money. I didn't celebrate it. I documented it, filed it away, because something told me this wasn't an ending. It was a setup, and the real test of my boundaries, my growth, my resolve was still ahead. The deposit sat in my account like a question mark. I checked it every morning for a week, half expecting it to disappear the way everything else had. It didn't. It stayed there, small, almost insulting in comparison to what had been taken, but heavy with implication. Money, I'd learned, is rarely just money. It's leverage, it's narrative, it's a way of saying I did something without saying I'm sorry. I told my therapist about it during our next session. She didn't tell me what to do, she never did. She just asked what the deposit made me feel. I surprised myself with the answer. Uneasy, I said, like I'm being pulled back into something I didn't agree to. She nodded. That's your intuition recognizing a boundary being tested. That word again, tested. Boundaries don't just exist, they get challenged, especially by people who benefited from you having none. The deposit wasn't generosity, it was an opening move. A few days later, my mother finally responded to my letter, not with words, with a missed call, then another, then a voicemail. Her voice sounded softer than before, careful in a way that told me she'd read what I wrote and understood more than she was willing to admit. She said she just wanted to check on me, said she hoped we could move forward. That phrase again, move forward, as if forward didn't require reckoning. I didn't call back. Instead, I focused on what was directly in front of me. Finals were coming up. My grades mattered, not because they defined me, but because they were proof that I was building something stable with my own hands. I picked up extra shifts at work, not out of desperation this time, but strategy. I budgeted, planned. For the first time in my life, my future felt like something I could actually touch. Then the rumors reached me. A coworker pulled me aside one afternoon, voice low, eyes sympathetic. She asked if everything was okay with my family, said she'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that my mother was worried sick about me, that I was pushing everyone away, that I was holding a grudge. The words stung not because they were new, but because they confirmed what I already knew. The story was being rewritten. I felt that old reflex rise up, the urge to explain, to correct, to defend myself before the version of me they were selling became the truth. But therapy had taught me something crucial. You don't chase down every lie told about you, especially when the people telling it benefit from you staying quiet or coming back. Still, something shifted in me that day. I realized silence, when chosen intentionally, is different from silence forced upon you. The silence my mother chose had erased me. The silence I was choosing now was protecting me. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote out a timeline, not for court, not for confrontation, for me. Every paycheck I contributed, every bill unpaid, every warning sign I ignored, every moment my mother looked away. Seeing it laid out stripped the fog from my memories. This wasn't one mistake, it was a pattern. A week later, another deposit appeared, larger this time. My pulse spiked as I stared at the screen. No message, no apology, just more money, a clearer attempt. I knew then what was coming next before it arrived. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my door. No call, no warning, just a knock, soft, hesitant, unmistakable. I stood frozen on the other side of it, heart racing, knowing that opening that door would change something irrevocably. Because this time she hadn't come to talk. She had come to ask me for something, and I had no idea yet whether saying no would finally free me or cost me the last thread of family I still had. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, listening to my own breathing, slow and loud in my ears, while my mother knocked again, gentler this time, like she already sensed she was on fragile ground. My hand hovered over the lock, and for a split second, I wanted to disappear, pretend I wasn't home, pretend none of this was happening. But avoidance had ruled too much of my life already. I opened the door. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, not dramatically, just worn around the edges, like someone who hadn't slept well in a long time. Her eyes flicked past me into my apartment, taking in the small couch, the neat stack of textbooks, the quiet order of my space. I saw something like surprise cross her face, maybe even discomfort. This wasn't the version of me she'd been telling people about. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. That was my first boundary of the night, intentional, conscious. I wasn't inviting her back into my life. I was allowing a conversation. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, and started talking immediately about stress, about finances, about how my stepfather was trying to make things right. She gestured vaguely, like the deposits were proof of effort instead of evidence of guilt. Then she finally said what she'd come for. She wanted me to sign something. A document, informal, she said, just an agreement acknowledging repayment, no wrongdoing admitted, no timeline specified, just something to show people things were being handled. My stomach dropped as I realized what this really was, not repair, damage control, a way to quiet the situation without ever naming it. "I won't sign that," I said. The words came out calmly, surprising both of us. Her face tightened. She said I was being difficult, that I was holding on to anger, that I was making things worse than they needed to be. I listened, noticing how easily she slipped back into the language of blame once her request was denied. Therapy had sharpened my ear. I could hear manipulation where I used to hear concern. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm clear." She asked what I wanted, really wanted. The question felt heavy, like a trap dressed as generosity. I thought about it carefully before answering. "I want accountability," I said. "I want the truth acknowledged. I want you to stop protecting him at my expense." Silence filled the room, the same silence that had once destroyed me. But this time, I wasn't trapped inside it. I let it sit. She shook her head slowly, said she couldn't do that, said it would tear everything apart. I felt a familiar ache rise in my chest, but it didn't swallow me this time. I recognized it for what it was, grief for something that was never really there. "Then I can't help you," I said. Her eyes filled with tears. She accused me of choosing money over family. I almost laughed at the irony. Money hadn't broken us. Silence had. I walked her to the door, my hands steady even as my heart ached. When she left, she didn't hug me, she didn't look back. I locked the door and leaned against it, letting the weight of the moment wash over me. I cried, but quietly, cleanly, not from confusion, from release. That night, I emailed my bank and my legal aid clinic asking how to formally document repayments without absolving responsibility. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was protecting myself, again. The next morning, I woke up lighter, sadder maybe, but lighter, because for the first time, I hadn't bent. I hadn't explained myself to exhaustion. I hadn't swallowed my truth to keep someone else comfortable. I didn't know yet how far this would go, how many people would be lost along the way, but I knew something had shifted permanently. I was no longer asking to be chosen. I was choosing myself. And that decision was about to ripple outward in ways I never expected. The ripples came quietly at first, then all at once. 2 days after my mother left, my stepfather sent a message for the first time since the deposits began. No greeting, no warmth, just a paragraph explaining how misunderstandings had spiraled and how he was trying to resolve things the mature way. He said the document my mother brought over was meant to protect everyone. He said legal involvement would ruin lives. He said I was being unreasonable. I read it once, then again, more slowly. The tone wasn't apologetic. It was strategic. This wasn't a man seeking forgiveness. This was a man afraid of consequences. I forwarded the message to my legal aid advisor and didn't respond. That small act, choosing not to engage, felt bigger than it should have. Old Jasmine would have explained herself into knots, tried to soften his language, tried to prove she wasn't the villain they were painting. This version of me understood something different. clarity doesn't require participation in manipulation. The clinic helped me draft a formal response, polite, firm. All repayments would be documented. Any further contact would go through counsel. No statements would be signed absolving responsibility without full accounting. I read it over 3 times before sending it, my chest tight with the awareness that this would escalate things, but I sent it anyway. That same week, my mother stopped calling. The quiet that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. I filled it with routine, morning walks before work, study sessions at the library, therapy on Wednesdays, cooking meals instead of grabbing whatever was fastest. These small, boring acts stitched stability into my days. I was building a life that didn't depend on anyone else's honesty. Then the rumors changed tone. Where before I was unstable, now I was cold, calculated, ungrateful. A cousin messaged me asking why I was dragging things out when money was being repaid. I asked her a simple question in return. Do you know how much was taken? She didn't. No one did. That was the point. Partial truth is still a lie. One afternoon, as I sat in class taking notes, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. My credit monitoring app flagged new activity, an inquiry tied to an old joint account I hadn't accessed in years. My hands went cold as I logged in, heart racing. Someone was trying to move money again. I left class early and called the bank, my voice shaking but controlled. The representative confirmed the attempt had been blocked only because the account was flagged after previous activity. Previous activity. The words echoed in my head as the implications sank in. Even now, even after exposure, after therapy, after boundaries, someone was still trying to reach into my financial life. I locked everything down that day, froze my credit, closed accounts, changed passwords. It felt invasive and exhausting and necessary. Betrayal doesn't end when you walk away. It tests whether you're paying attention. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the timeline I'd written weeks earlier. The pattern was undeniable now. Silence, theft, deflection, blame, control, repeat. Seeing it so clearly made my hand shake, not with fear, but with resolve. I realized then that this wasn't just about recovering money or proving a point. This was about severing a cycle, about making sure no one could ever leverage my loyalty against me again. As I turned off the lamp and prepared for bed, my phone lit up one last time. A voicemail notification from my mother. I didn't listen to it yet. I stared at the screen, knowing that whatever she said next would either acknowledge the truth I'd been living or confirm for once and for all that her silence was not a phase, it was a choice. And so was mine. I listened to the voicemail the next morning, not because I felt ready, but because avoidance had already taken enough from me. I sat at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling across my notebooks, and pressed play with a steadiness I didn't know I had learned. My mother's voice sounded tired, not dramatic, not pleading, just worn down in a way that felt dangerously close to honesty. She said she hadn't slept, said things were unraveling at home, said my stepfather was angry now, at her, at me, at the situation. She paused for a long time before continuing, like she was choosing her words carefully. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. I don't know how to fix this. I closed my eyes and let that sentence land, not because it was new, but because it was the first time she'd admitted helplessness instead of hiding behind silence. She didn't apologize, she didn't name the harm, but she didn't excuse it either. It was a crack, small, incomplete, real. She asked if we could meet again, not to talk about money, not to pressure me, just to talk. I didn't answer right away. Therapy had taught me something crucial. Progress doesn't erase patterns. A moment of vulnerability doesn't undo years of avoidance. I had to decide whether this conversation would be about repair or about pulling me back into emotional labor that wasn't mine to carry. I asked myself the question my therapist always asked me: what do I need to feel safe? The answer surprised me. I need the truth, I whispered to the empty room, out loud. I called her back and left a message of my own. My voice shook only slightly. I'm willing to meet, I said, but only if we're honest. I need you to acknowledge what happened. Not explain it, not soften it, acknowledge it. She didn't respond that day, or the next. In the meantime, life kept moving forward. Finals week came and went. I passed every class. My credit score climbed enough to qualify for a better apartment. I toured places after work, standing in empty rooms, imagining a life that didn't feel temporary anymore. Independence tasted like relief. A week later, my mother finally texted back. Okay, it said, I can do that. We met again at the same diner, same booth, same burnt coffee, but the energy was different. She looked nervous this time, not defensive. She sat quietly for a moment before speaking, fingers wrapped tightly around her mug. He took the money, she said finally. I knew it wasn't right, and I didn't stop it. There it was. Not enough, but real. Something inside me exhaled slowly. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't reach across the table. I let the truth sit between us, unpadded and heavy. She went on to admit that she'd been afraid of confrontation, of financial collapse, of being alone. She said she thought staying quiet would keep things from falling apart. And it cost me everything, I said calmly, not accusing, just stating fact. She nodded, tears sliding down her face. This time, I believed them, not because they erased the past, but because they didn't ask me to. We didn't leave that diner healed, we didn't leave reconciled, but we left with something we'd never had before: reality. In the weeks that followed, our relationship changed shape. Less frequent contact, clear boundaries, no shared finances, no unspoken expectations. It was fragile, new, honest in a way that felt uncomfortable but necessary. My stepfather faded out of my life completely after that. No more messages, no more deposits, just absence. I didn't chase closure. I'd learned that accountability doesn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes in the form of distance. One evening, as I packed boxes in my new apartment, my own lease, my own keys, I paused and looked around. Sunlight through clean windows, furniture I chose, silence that felt safe instead of suffocating. I thought about how long I'd believed protection came from other people, from family roles, from unspoken agreements. I thought about how expensive that belief had been. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. I'm trying, it said. I know it's late. I stared at the screen, feeling something settle into place. Not forgiveness, not resentment, but acceptance. Trying doesn't erase harm, but silence no longer controls me. And for the first time, I wasn't building my life around what others failed to do. I was building it around what I would never tolerate again. What I didn't know yet was that the final lesson about forgiveness, memory, and power was still waiting for me. And it would come not from my family, but from myself. The move into my new apartment should have felt like a finish line. New lease, new locks, new address that didn't belong to anyone else but me. And in many ways, it did feel like a victory. But healing doesn't follow straight lines. It circles back, tests what you've learned, asks if you're willing to live differently, not just survive differently. The first night alone in that space, the quiet felt too loud. No traffic outside my car, no roommates shifting in the next room, just me, my thoughts, and the unfamiliar sound of safety. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let myself feel it all. The grief, the pride, the anger that still hadn't fully loosened its grip. My mother called a few days later, not about money, not about my stepfather, just to ask how the move went. I answered honestly. "It's good," I said. "It's strange." She laughed softly like she understood. We talked for 10 minutes. That was all. When we hung up, I realized something important. I wasn't bracing myself afterward. The boundaries were holding. Therapy had shifted from crisis management to reflection. We talked about forgiveness, not the version people push where you erase memory to make others comfortable, but the kind that's about freeing yourself from carrying poison. My therapist asked if I had forgiven my mother. I thought about it carefully. "I don't think forgiveness is a moment," I said. "I think it's a practice." I could forgive her without restoring access. I could understand her fear without minimizing my harm. I could love her without letting her silence define me anymore. That realization felt like power, not loud, not performative, just solid. One afternoon, while reviewing my budget, I noticed something that made me smile. My emergency fund had reached a number I never thought I'd see after losing everything. It wasn't wealth, it was security, the kind you build quietly, dollar by dollar, boundary by boundary. At work, I applied for a promotion I would have talked myself out of a year ago. When my supervisor asked why I thought I was ready, I didn't shrink. I talked about my skills, my growth, my resilience. I didn't mention survival. I didn't need to. Family gatherings became optional. I attended some, declined others. No explanations beyond "that doesn't work for me." The world didn't collapse when I stopped over-explaining. In fact, it expanded. One evening, I found an old notebook from the time I was sleeping in my car, pages filled with fear, confusion, and desperate questions. I sat on my couch and read it slowly, recognizing that girl, but no longer living inside her. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her something important. Your life doesn't end when people fail you. It begins when you stop waiting for them to change. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed with a notification, a calendar reminder I'd set months ago, back when everything felt unstable. Review boundaries. I smiled, not because it was easy, but because I'd kept going. I knew the final piece of this journey wasn't about money or even family. It was about choosing who I would be from here on out. And that choice, quiet, firm, unshakable, was already made. I didn't wake up one morning feeling healed. There was no dramatic moment where everything clicked into place and the past stopped echoing. What happened instead was quieter, more honest. I woke up choosing myself over and over again until it became instinct instead of effort. The final shift came on an ordinary Tuesday night. I was sitting at my kitchen table, bills paid, budget balanced, textbooks stacked neatly where panic used to live. The silence around me wasn't tense anymore. It was calm, safe, earned. And in that stillness, I realized something that stopped me cold. I was no longer angry at my mother. Not because what she did or failed to do didn't matter. It mattered deeply. But because I had finally stopped expecting her to become someone she had never learned how to be. Her silence had wounded me. Her fear had cost me everything I thought I could depend on. And still, I had survived. Forgiveness didn't arrive as reconciliation. It arrived as release. I forgave her for my peace, not her comfort. I forgave without forgetting, without rewriting the truth, without offering access that hadn't been earned. I forgave by choosing not to carry the weight of her choices into my future. The lesson stayed with me, sharp and clear. Silence can be just as damaging as betrayal, and love without accountability is not protection, it's neglect. I no longer waited for anyone to speak up for me. I didn't wait for permission to feel wronged or justified. I learned how to advocate for myself in rooms that once made me small. I learned how to say no without explanation. I learned that boundaries are not walls, they're doors you control. Today, my life looks nothing like it did when everything collapsed. I stand on my own feet, my finances are mine, my peace is mine. My voice is steady even when it shakes, and I trust myself in a way I never had before because I've seen what I can survive. My family story didn't end the way I was raised to believe it should. There was no perfect reunion, no sweeping apology that made everything right. What I got instead was something far more powerful. I became my own protector. And once I learned that, no one's silence could ever take everything from me again. If you learned something new from my life story, please like this video, subscribe to join our community for more stories like mine, and comment down below where you're watching this video from. I'd truly love to know.